Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for coming. I'm going to hand you over to our host and moderator in a little while. That will be my colleague, Assistant Professor Saimel de Guzman de Ulat. But I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for coming. It's our pleasure to welcome you to the second session for our UPD-Oxford Philosophy Lecture Series. Our speaker for today will be Stephen Law, and until now, I'm still not quite sure how we managed to get someone like Stephen to speak here at UP Diliman. So we're very honored to have him, and we're honored to have you with us as well. Okay, so I think we can start the ceremony. Without any further ado, I'll be turning you over to our Master of Ceremony for today, Assistant Professor Saimel de Guzman de Ulat.
All right, thank you very much, Assistant Professor Fernando. Can we give him a round of applause because it's because of his initiative that we were able to have our first ever UPD Oxford Lecture Series and the previous one as well, the UPD Cambridge Lecture Series. So first, let's give Assistant Professor Fernando a round of applause for giving us this opportunity. Thank you very much. Also, I reiterate his greeting. Thank you very much as well for having you here. I know that it's a Monday afternoon and a lot of us are um, not having classes because of the class suspension, but still you chose to join us in the second installment of the first UPD Oxford lecture series. I believe a lot of us are enamored in philosophy because of some of the readings we might have encountered. In my case, it's actually Stephen Law's writings on the philosophy gym, which first called upon me to study philosophy. So this is really a great honor for me to be able to host a session upon which he is our lecturer. So, some further reminders before we proceed. So, number one, please observe proper decorum throughout the event. And of course, everyone is encouraged to open their cameras during the session. Um, However, everyone is also requested to mute their microphones unless you're called upon to raise your question. And after the lecture is over, we will open the floor for further questions from your end. So now, without further ado, we now call on our highly esteemed Associate Professor, Professor Dr. Karen Connie Abalos Orendain as the current um, officer in charge because our current chairperson will not be available to attend for this session. So can we give her a round of applause? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Welcome, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining the second lecture in our UP Diliman Oxford series. I think we have even more people participating today compared to the first one, and we are so proud of that. Everyone from various universities and from other constituent units in the UP Diliman system are here. And thus, we are so grateful to Professor Stephen Law for his sharing his time and his expertise with us this afternoon. And thanks to Assistant Professor Henry Fernando for making it all happen, for making sure that they're invited and not giving up until they say yes. And I welcome him, Professor Stephen, and the rest of our audience members today on behalf of our chair, Professor Liza Ocampo, who is trapped in several meetings as we speak. I'm sure she'd rather be here. Thank you to Assistant Professor Saimel de Guzman for being our host today and for helping us plan this event. To Sir Gavin and Ma'am Ingrid for making this happen, thank you very much. Like most of you, I am looking forward to our topic, the Evil God Challenge, someone who has a very complicated relationship with God. So let's begin so that we have more time to discuss and have questions later on. Thank you once again, Stephen. Looking forward to your lecture.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I'm delighted to be involved. Thank you very much for inviting me. So I've got this talk on the Evil God Challenge, which is based on a paper I published in
Yes.
2010. And
Excuse me, Stephen. Is it okay if we go on and introduce you beforehand for those who haven't heard of you and your writings yet, perhaps?
oh, okay, yeah, sorry.
Uh, um,
Yeah.
some of them, a lot of them have surely heard of you because the Philosophy Gym is one of the most famous books out there as an introductory um instrument for philosophy. But for those of you who might have not heard of him, Stephen Law de Phil Oxon is a philosopher, an author, and he is based in at the Oxford University Department of Continuing Education, where he is currently a director of philosophy. He was also previously a reader in philosophy and the head of the Department of Philosophy at Lathrop College, University of London. He completed his B.Phil in the philosophy at Trinity College, Oxford, before moving on to Queen's College, Oxford, where he obtained his D.Phil. He is the author of many popular introduction to philosophies books such as The Philosophy Gym. So, in particular, my first interaction with your writing in the Philosophy Gym is through this short dialogue titled "Could a Machine Think," which is actually quite um, ironic as well because it was Professor Vecken who talked about AI last time. But even then, several decades prior, I was able to be introduced to the concept of AI because of your writing. So, without further ado, let's hear Professor Stephen Law's work on the evil god. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Simon. Yeah, sorry for interrupting, cutting you off. Yeah, so no, I'm delighted to do this. Thank you for inviting me. Um, I've got some slides now, which I'm going to put up. So let's see if that works. Mhm. So I'm hoping you can all see my slides there. Give me a nod. Yeah, good. Okay, so this is a talk that's based on this paper that I wrote and published in 2010 in religious studies, and it became quite well known actually. I'm not quite sure why, but it caught the imagination, and it's the most viewed paper of published by religious studies of the last decade, in fact. So it became a very well known paper. And what I'm going to do here is just give you a sort of introduction. It's going to be a fairly knockabout introduction. In fact, I use these slides in schools quite regularly, so this is going to be pitched, not too high, but then maybe we can get into some detail in the discussion afterwards. So, to begin with, then, I'm going to be focusing to begin with on this very traditional conception of God, uh, the three O's God, if you like, a God that has these three characteristics of being omnipotent, all powerful, or perhaps if you prefer, maximally powerful, omniscient, all knowing, maximally knowing, and then omnibenevolent, all good. God is a perfect being, a God of love, and so on. So, is it reasonable to believe in a God like
Hi,
that?
Stephen. Could you share your screen in full screen mode, by the way? I'm not sure if we're able to see the next slide, which I think is where you're at.
Oh, it should say reasonable belief question mark. You can't see that.
No, we're still on the title slide.
Oh, something's gone wrong then. Um, because I am screen sharing at the moment. It says you are screen sharing. Not sure what's gone wrong.
Oh, hi, Stephen. Maybe you can go and play from the start, or if you want, maybe we can share it for you.
Yeah, let's have one more go just to see what's gone wrong. So I'm going to play from the start. Here we go. So can you see me moving to the second slide now?
No,
Uh,
unfortunately.
there's some problem here with the software. It should you try at your end then.
Okay. I will share my screen then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, hold on. There.
There, better.
That worked? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So good. So yeah, here's the paper, The Evil God Challenge. If you click, you'll see it was published in 2010, and then we move on to the next slide, hopefully. Yes. So we're focused on a God that's all powerful or maximally powerful, omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. And then the next slide, we're going to look at reasonableness. So I think that people who believe in God typically think that their belief is, if not proved, at least not unreasonable. It's not like believing in fairies or Santa Claus or something absurd like that. It's much more reasonable than that, um, even if we can't conclusively prove that there's a God. And that's really what I'm going to question in this talk. I'm going to suggest that actually I can't see that there's good reason to think that belief in God is significantly more reasonable than belief in some of these other absurd things. So that's my ambitious project. The first thing I'm going to do is point out that when you ask people why they believe in God, very often the arguments they give turn out not really to be arguments for the existence of this very specific deity. So design arguments, for example, are very popular. People argue that the universe appears to have been fine-tuned for life and to have conscious beings in it. Had the initial starting conditions and the laws been even just a tiny bit different, then we wouldn't be here, and indeed consciousness wouldn't arise, and so on. So it seems as if you really need to fine-tune your universe in order to create conscious beings like ourselves or have us evolve within it. What are the chances that the universe should have that Goldilocks property of being just right for life and for consciousness? What are the chances that it should, what's the probability that it should have that feature just by chance? Extremely low. It's far more reasonable then to believe that some intelligence set the universe up in this way in order to produce conscious beings like ourselves. So that's a popular argument. But the thing that I'm drawing your attention to is that this argument actually doesn't give us any clue as to the moral character of the designer. In fact, it doesn't even need to be a god. I mean, the designer could be the inhabitants of some other universe that somehow engineered this universe, for example. Um, Certainly, even if it is a god, it doesn't have to be a good god. It could be an amoral god or an evil god. So this is a popular argument for the existence of God, but on closer examination, it's not really an argument for that very specific God, a good God. And the same goes for many of the other most popular arguments for the existence of God. If you believe that there's a first cause or a prime mover, the simplest versions of those arguments don't really give you any clue as to the moral character of the prime mover or the first cause and so on. There are arguments specifically for a good God or arguments for why God must be good. But they tend to be a bit more in the background. The arguments that people generally wheel out first are basic cosmological arguments and teleological arguments, for example. And in their simplest form, certainly, they don't really give us any clue as to the moral character of God. Worse still, there's a powerful looking argument against the existence of God. So next slide. Here it is. In fact, there are two arguments here. So the top argument has two premises and a conclusion, and it's called the logical problem of evil. The first premise says, if evil exists, God does not exist. Why would you think that? Well, God is all-powerful, so he can prevent evil, and he's all-knowing, so he's going to know if there is any evil, and he's all good, so he won't want there to be any evil. So there just shouldn't be any evil. But there is evil, that's the second premise. Evil exists, therefore God does not exist. It's a very simple, straightforward argument against the existence of God. It's not a terribly popular argument. It's got a very obvious flaw. The first premise of the argument looks very suspect. Surely God may allow some evils if that's the price paid for still greater goods. So the mere fact that evil exists does not entail that there's no God. There could be a good reason for the evil. So, for example, you might suggest that we have been given free will, and that's a very great good. Without free will, we cannot be moral agents that are morally responsible for what we do. So, without free will, moral goodness won't exist in the universe. And that's very important. The downside to God giving us free will is that we can then freely choose to do evil rather than good. And so some evil exists, but it is still a better universe than it would have been had we not been given free will. So that first premise is just not true, it seems. So we can put the logical problem of evil as it's known to one side, and I'm not going to be spending any more time on that. It's the second argument that I'm really interested in. It's called the evidential problem. You can present it in different ways. I've chosen this way of presenting it because it brings out really the contrast with the logical problem very nicely. It's the same argument, but we've added a word, and the word is gratuitous. So a gratuitous evil will be an evil for which there is no adequate God justifying reason. Perhaps God will allow some evils if that's the price paid for greater goods, but he's not going to allow pointless evils. But surely, second premise, there are evils in the world. There's evil on such a scale and in such depth that it's implausible that there's some good God justifying reason for every last ounce of it. And if there's any gratuitous evil, then presumably it follows that there is no God, because God is not going to allow pointless evil. Of course, by evil here we mean two things. We mean moral evils, the morally bad things that we do to each other. We start wars, we kill each other, and so on. And then there are the natural evils, as they're known, natural diseases and natural disasters that cause great suffering. So there's an awful lot of that. Is there some good God justifying reason for every last ounce of it? There had better be, because if there is not, then it seems that there is no God. So that's the evidential problem, and that's the problem on which I'm going to focus to begin with. So I think we can carry on. I think there's a bit at the bottom. Oh yeah. So let's have a look at some evils then. I've got all of the cliched examples here. Immense suffering in the world, cancer, the Holocaust, the Black Death. I've added hemorrhoids as a joke in order to try and lighten the mood because it's also depressing. Next slide. There's not just our human suffering, there's the suffering of the sentient creatures with which we share this planet. For example, around about 250 million years ago, an enormous object hit the Gulf of Mexico. This was a mass extinction event. It wiped out 95% of all species from the face of the earth. colossal amount of, I mean, unimaginable quantities of suffering meted out to the sentient inhabitants of this planet. This has been going on for many hundreds of millions of years. Is there really going to be some good, God-justifying reason for every last ounce of all of that suffering? Seems very unlikely to me. Next slide. Childhood mortality rates. We have been around for, actually, that's wrong. Actually, it's the estimate now is about 300,000 years for Homo sapiens. Your chances of making it to adulthood are not particularly good if you had been born in almost any other generation of human beings up until very, very recently. Around about 40 to 60% of children were dead by the time they'd reached their fifth birthday. So incredible amounts of suffering. There's the suffering of the children who would have died horribly over all of those generations. The psychological torment of the parents who've had to watch their children die, helpless to do anything about it. Ask any parent that's lost a child what's the worst thing that they've ever experienced, and they'll probably say that is. Almost certainly they will say that is. So quite extraordinary amounts of pain and suffering, including psychological torment, meted out by God, if he's there, over the sweep of human history, about 300,000 years. Is there really likely to be some good God justifying reason for every last ounce of that? Again, seems highly unlikely. So next slide. So if there's any gratuitous evil, even an ounce, seems there's no God, but it's looking highly unlikely that there's going to be some good God justifying reason for every last ounce of pain and suffering, moral evil. So it's looking highly unlikely that there's a God. Is the way that people generally run this argument, the evidential problem of evil. So I'm just rehearsing here an argument with which I'm sure you're already very familiar. Let's carry on to the next slide. You'll probably also be aware that there are various ways in which those who believe in God try and deal with this problem, the evidential problem. One of the things that they do is they cook up explanations for the evil. They try to identify reasons why God would, in fact, allow all of this evil. And here is a very simple example. This is a free will theodicy or explanation. There are more sophisticated versions. This is just a very simple version. Again, we're appealing to free will. So you can appeal to free will to try and deal with the logical problem of evil, but you can also appeal to free will in order to try and deal with the evidential problem of evil. God gave us free will. He could have made us mere automata or puppet beings that always did the right thing. But if you're a puppet, if you're attached to God's strings, then you're not morally responsible for what you do. You have no control. And it's important to God that we be free moral agents that can freely choose to do good, because it's only if we can freely choose to do good that we can bring moral goodness into the universe. So God cuts our strings and sets us free, but some of us then choose to do bad things, evil results. That's the price God pays for the very great good of our having free will and the opportunity to do good of our own volition. So there's a simple theodicy. Obviously, this merely scratches the surface so far as evil is concerned, because this only accounts for the evil that we freely choose to do. It doesn't account for 300,000 years of very high childhood mortality rates, because that wasn't a product of our acting freely. And it doesn't account for hundreds of millions of years of animal suffering before we even show up. So, clearly there are limits to this theodicy, but nevertheless, perhaps we're beginning to account for at least some of the evil here. There are many more theodicies. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. Let's go to slide number 2. So, according to the theologian John Hick, bad experiences, experiencing evil, this can actually be a good thing. We can be enriched by a certain amount of suffering. Somebody that's experienced a rather unpleasant disease, for example, and pulled through, survived, may say that they don't regret having been through that pain and suffering because they learned a great deal from it. They benefited from it. So we're going through bad experiences, but it's all part of a process of soul making, as John Hick puts it. We are actually having opportunities given to us by virtue of our being caused to suffer and so on. The reason that there's a child there on a bike is to illustrate. Well, there's an analogy that's often used here by the theists. They say, if you're a parent and your daughter wants to learn to ride her bike, you'll start her off on the stabilizers there, which are attached to the bike. But eventually you're going to have to take the stabilizers off if she's going to be able to learn how to ride the bike properly. And when you take the stabilizers off, she's almost certainly going to fall off, and there is going to be a grazed knee, and there is going to be blood and pain and suffering. Probably quite a bit of it as she continues to fall off the bike. But that's okay, because although you know that there's going to be this pain and suffering, you know that at the end of the process, she will have grown and developed. She can now learn, she can now ride her bike, whereas previously she couldn't. And also she'll have a sense of achievement, which you can't legitimately have if you haven't actually been through such a somewhat unpleasant process. So there are very important goods which we can't have unless there's a certain amount of pain and suffering in the universe. So yeah, you could say this is a veil of soul making. Again, there are limitations to this, aren't there? You can see that it's difficult to see how you explain hundreds of millions of years of animal suffering, because presumably God is not trying to make the souls of the creatures that he's slaughtering on an industrial scale over hundreds of millions of years. Is it really true that the pain and suffering that we go through is there to improve us and make us better human beings? I mean, many people who experience pain and suffering are not built up by that pain and suffering. They're destroyed by it. They bow out in despair. Their characters are broken. They're not just physically destroyed, they're psychologically destroyed by the experiences through which they have been put. So if you actually look at the way pain and suffering is distributed in the world, it's not a good fit for this being a veil of soul making. So again, there are limitations, there are problems to this kind of theodicy. So maybe we'll try another one. Let's go for theodicy number 3. So you might argue that, as the Reverend John Polkinghorne does, that we need to live in a stable, law-governed universe in order to have certain important goods available to us. I'll give you my illustration rather than one of his. So my illustration is this: if you want to interact with other human beings in a moral way, you need to know that certain actions are going to have certain effects. So if I can see that you are hungry and cold, I need to know that if I strike a match, it will produce a flame, and that the flame will produce heat, and the heat will cook some food, and the heat will warm you up, and the food will nourish you, and so on. I need to know that there are all of these regularities in place, all of these causal connections. If they're not in place, then I'm helpless, and I can't do anything to help you. So in order for me to interact with you as and do good, I need to live in a fairly stable and law-governed universe. The downside to those laws of nature is that they produce tectonic plate movements, which produce earthquakes and tsunamis, and that's an unfortunate consequence of those laws. But it's the price that God has to pay for the very great good of our being able to interact with each other as free moral agents. So call that a laws of nature theodicy. If there are limitations to all of these theodicies, of course, and theists will very often admit that they only go so far, they barely scratch the surface, and so they have another option available to them, which we're going to look at now, which is the next slide. There's a position known as skeptical theism, which you could adopt. Now, skeptical theism is theism, so people who are theists can sign up to this. What they're skeptical about is not the theism, they're skeptical about our ability to know the reasons that God might have for allowing pain and suffering and so on. They suggest that we're not justified in supposing that there is no good reason for the pain and the suffering and the moral depravity that we observe. And they'll often argue like this. They'll use this analogy. So there's a garage there, and you can look into the garage and you can see no elephants. And because you can see no elephants, you'll probably conclude that there are no elephants in the garage. And that's perfectly reasonable, because if there was an elephant there, you'd probably see it. So that inference works for elephants. It's a no-seeum inference, if you like. I can't see it, so it's probably not there. Okay. That works for elephants, but it doesn't work for insects. So it's true that I can't see any insects in the garage looking from the outside, but just because I can't see the insects doesn't mean that they're not there. They could easily be there. They're just too small for me to detect them. My eyesight is just not good enough. So that no-seeum inference is faulty. It doesn't work. And now what the skeptical theist does is they say, well, in effect, what the atheist running the evidential problem of evil is doing is they're running a no-thinkum inference. They're drawing the conclusion that there's no, or there's unlikely to be some good reason for all of the evils that we observe, from the premise that we can't think of a good reason. But just because we can't think of such a reason is not good grounds for thinking that there's no reason there. There could easily be a good reason back there somewhere, even if we can't think of it. We need to acknowledge that we are mere human beings, that our cognitive abilities are limited. And once we acknowledge that, then we really should admit that we're in no position to say there is unlikely to be a good reason for all of the pain and suffering that we see. And if that's true, then we can't know that the second premise of the evidential problem of evil is true. We can't know that there are, or that there probably are, gratuitous evils, because for all we know, there is a good reason for these evils and they're not gratuitous. So skeptical theism is an alternative strategy that you can adopt rather than providing the explanations or the theodicies. You can just throw up your hands and say, maybe I can't think of a good reason for the evil, but that doesn't mean that I'm justified in concluding that there's no reason back there somewhere. So this is called the skeptical theist response. And you can combine it with theodicies if you wish. You can offer theodicies and you can adopt a skeptical theist position. It's a very popular move currently, skeptical theism. It's but not universally so. There are plenty of theists that don't like skeptical theism, actually. So Richard Swinburne, for example, does not like skeptical theism. And in fact, I've published on skeptical theism, and I think that it's fatally flawed. It's not going to work in the way that the theist wants. So we could talk about that later on, maybe. But for the time being, I'm just sort of setting up skeptical theism as another option that you might adopt as a theist in order to try and deal with the evidential problem of evil. So what's on the next slide? I can't remember. Let's find out. So yeah, quick summary then. So you might think that at this point, we've shown a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim might think to themselves, you've offered me this evidential problem of evil as an argument against the existence of God, but it's not a good objection because actually I can explain quite a lot of the evil that we observe using my various theodicies. And even the evil I can't explain isn't good evidence against God, because for all any of us can know, there is actually a good reason for the evils that we observe. So we've brought the problem down to size. It's no longer a fatal objection to theism, the evidential problem of evil. So what I've given you so far is a sort of an overview of the evidential problem of evil, and then an overview of some of the ways in which theists respond to it. They offer theodicies, they embrace skeptical theism. These are two of the things that they do. So let's go on to the next slide. So now I'm going to construct an analogy. I'm very fond of analogies. I don't know why, but I just find them very attractive ways of thinking about stuff. In fact, I think almost every paper I've ever written really is an analogy, actually. It occurred to me quite recently. And so what I'm going to give you here is an analogy, which I hope will be illuminating. I think it can kind of shed some light on these issues that we're looking at, maybe get you to look at these issues in a slightly different way. So let's consider an alternative hypothesis, that there is one God, and he is the creator of the universe, the designer of the universe, the cause of the universe, and this being is omnipotent and omniscient. But we're going to change the third omni attribute to omni-malevolent rather than omni-benevolent. So this deity is very bad indeed. His cruelty is beyond our comprehension, and his malice knows no bounds. It's from our perspective, his evil is just unfathomably deep. And he's the creator of the universe. Now, I think most people, when they consider this hypothesis, which we can wheel out to explain the existence of the universe and its fine-tuned character and so on, they consider this a pretty absurd suggestion. I mean, they'll rule it out almost immediately. And I find that interesting. I'm going to focus on that response, that this is just ridiculous. So let's go on to the next slide. After all, you might say, in defense of belief in an evil God, many of the most popular arguments for God turn out on closer examination to be just as good arguments as they stand for an evil God as for a good God. Take the design argument we looked at earlier on. The universe appears to have been fine-tuned to create conscious beings such as ourselves. What are the chances that it should have this Goldilocks property of being just right for life? By chance? Extraordinarily unlikely. Far more reasonable to believe that some intelligence fashioned the universe in order to have conscious beings within it. Well, that argument, as we saw, gives us no clue as to the moral character of our designer. We have no reason to think that this designer is omnibenevolent. But then also it could be omni-malevolent. I mean, maybe the reason that the designer has created the universe and created conscious beings is so that he can torture them. So, why not? Why not consider this particular hypothesis? Similarly, very simple first cause arguments merely establish that there's some prime mover or first cause. Why does it have to be the omnibenevolent God? Why couldn't it be an omnimalevolent God? That works just as well in terms of accounting for the existence of the universe. So, given that we can use many of these arguments to support belief in an evil God, why are we so quick to dismiss belief in an evil God? And having talked to lots of people about this, in my experience, this may not be your reaction, but it's a common reaction is to say, well, it's a ridiculous thing to believe because there's too much good. There's love and laughter and ice cream and rainbows and just way too much good stuff for this to be the creation of a supremely powerful and malevolent deity. The world should look way, way worse than it does. I mean, yes, there's evil in it, but not nearly enough evil for this to be the creation of a supremely powerful and malevolent deity. So let's go to the next slide. So what we're looking at here, of course, is the mirror problem to the problem of evil, the evidential problem of evil. We're now looking at the evidential problem of good, which runs like this. So this is an objection to belief in an evil God that focuses on good. There's a lot of good in the universe, and some of it just appears to be completely unjustified from the perspective of an evil God. There's no evil reason for it. So it's going to be gratuitous good then. An evil God is not going to allow gratuitous or pointless goods, but the world seems to be full of such goods. Therefore, evil God does not exist. I think that that's a pretty good argument, actually, against the existence of an evil God. I think it's likely to occur to very many people. And I think that, prima facie, very powerful objection. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, I can't remember what else is on this. Yeah, so a gratuitous good is just a good that lacks any evil God justifying reason. So we're just flipping around the evidential problem of good, so evil, the evidential problem of evil to create the evidential problem of good. If you believe in a good God, you have to explain the evil. If you believe in an evil God, you have to explain the good. It's the same problem. So let's have a look at some of the goods. Beautiful sunsets and mountains. If there is an evil God, why would he give you a lovely view? Surely he would torture you with a red hot poker for eternity, not give you a beautiful sunset to enjoy. Why would an evil God give us healthy young bodies so that we can play sports and enjoy ourselves? Surely he would give us arthritic and decrepit bodies that were permanently in pain. So again, it looks like we've got pretty good evidence here that there's no evil God. Why would he give us children to love who love us unconditionally in return? Surely an evil God will not do that. He hates love, and he's certainly not going to give us beautiful children to love that love us unconditionally in return. Why would an evil God give us the opportunity to do good deeds and reduce suffering? There are people working in hospitals and charities and so on that doing their very best to reduce suffering. An evil God is going to clamp down on that sort of behavior, surely, because it's running contrary to his divine plan. And then finally, why does he bestow on some people, I don't know, David Beckham, say, fantastic good fortune and wealth and health and a beautiful wife and lovely children and yet another Bentley? And why would an evil God do that? It makes no sense. Surely this is excellent evidence that there is no evil God. So next slide. So the suggestion is that at least some of these goods are going to be gratuitous goods. It does seem then, certainly seems to me, that belief in an evil God is absurd, and it seems to me that we can know that on the basis of observation of the world around us. the evidence against an all evil God is surely overwhelming. But what if we make the following moves? So I'm now going to pretend, I don't actually believe in an evil God, obviously, but I'm going to pretend that I do now and come up with some, well, first of all, some theodicies. Let's have a look at free will. Can we do something with that? Yes, we can. Oops, yeah. Why would an evil God allow some people to do good, to reduce suffering? Well, because he gave us free will. Why would an evil God give us free will? Well, he'll give us free will because he wants us to do evil of our own volition. If we're not doing evil of our own free will, it's not moral evil. Moral evil is the kind, a very deep kind of evil that evil God is going to want to exist in the universe, and he can only have it if he sets us free. It gives us the opportunity to freely choose evil. So an evil God will give us free will. He'll probably also give us weak and selfish characters. And so we can freely choose to do evil. Some of us, unfortunately, from his perspective, choose to do good, work in hospitals, reduce suffering, that sort of thing. He hates that, but that's the price he has to pay for the very great evil of moral evil existing in the universe. So what we've got here is a theodicy. It's a mirror theodicy. It mirrors the free will theodicy that we saw being used to defend belief in a good God against the problem of evil. Now we're using the mirror version of the theodicy to defend belief in an evil God against the problem of good. If one of these theodicies is a good one, well, presumably the other one is too. I mean, if one of these explanations is effective, then the other one must be effective, surely. That's certainly how it looks at first blush. So we've flipped a theodicy. Maybe we can flip some more. Let's try another one. Move to the next slide. Earlier, we looked at the suggestion that we inhabit a veil of soul making. Well, now let's flip that theodicy and let's make it a veil of soul destruction. Why would an evil God create natural beauty as a contrast to make our appreciation of the ugliness and dreariness of day-to-day life all the more acute? An evil God knows that, if it's just relentlessly terrible, you kind of get used to it after a while. So you need to be reminded that things could have been better. That will increase the suffering. So an evil God will put some good into the world as a contrast to just so that we know that things could have been a lot better than they actually are. Let's go to the next slide. Why would he give us beautiful children to love? Well, he'll definitely do that, actually, if you think about it. The reason he'll do it is because it's only if you really love your kids that you'll really, really suffer when he kills them on an industrial scale over 300,000 years. If you don't care about your kids, well, you'll just shrug it off and have another one. But, in order to have the very worst forms of psychological torment, you need to love your kids. So God is going to give us children, and he is going to allow for love and so on because it allows him to introduce some of the very worst forms of psychological torment into his universe. Let's go to the next slide. Why does he give us healthy, fit bodies? Well, not for long. You get it for 10 or 15 years, and then slowly he takes it away again until you end up sliding into decay, disease, and decrepitude until you end up hopelessly ugly and incontinent, smelling of wee, and then you die having lived out an ultimately meaningless existence. And that's if he doesn't sort of run you over with a bus or get you with some fatal disease in the meantime. So you're constantly worried about the sword of Damocles hanging over your head. This is a recipe for awful psychological torment. It's a bit like giving a child a beautiful toy and then smashing it up in the front of them. That is just wicked. What God is doing, evil God is doing, is he's giving us something fantastic and then is smashing it up in front of us. It is there to maximize pain and suffering. Next slide. So by giving us something and then snatching it away, evil God can make us suffer even more than if we never had it in the first place. So yeah, this is a veil of soul destruction. Another example of that. Next slide. Why would a few people get fantastic stuff? You know, David Beckham, they're getting into his brand new Ferrari. Why would an evil god do that? Surely an evil god would torture David Beckham for all eternity with a red hot poker, not give him yet another multi-million-dollar contract. Well, it's only if a few people get really great stuff that the rest of us will suffer from things like jealousy, resentment, frustration, a deep sense of injustice. None of that is going to be possible unless a few people have some great stuff. These are what you might call, I mean, you know, jealousy and resentment are second order evils that require certain first order goods. Some people have got to have good stuff in order for us to feel jealous about it. Okay, so yeah, an evil god is going to give some people, not too many, just a few, some great stuff, and then he's going to really, they're going to really flaunt it in front of us. So we're going to be constantly reminded about this. We know that no matter how hard we work, we'll never be able to achieve these things. We know that they don't deserve these things. It's just a recipe for endless psychological strife. And also, of course, even David Beckham isn't really happy because we're psychologically set up in such a way that whatever level of affluence we have beyond a certain point, this is well known, psychologically well established fact, you just adapt to it quite quickly and your levels of happiness just regress to the norm. So David Beckham isn't any happier than anyone else, despite the fact that he's got all of this money and so on. So it's a win-win really for evil God. It's exactly what he's going to do. So yeah, Veil of Soul Destruction, we've explained more features of the world in a way which makes them entirely compatible with the existence of a supremely powerful and malevolent deity. Next slide. So Hello Magazine then is all part of Evil God's master plan to make the earth a living hell by endlessly rubbing our noses in the injustice of it, constantly dangling these baubles in front of us and saying, see, look what they've got and you can't have it. It's a perfect recipe for psychological torment. Next slide. Oh yes, you'll remember the mirror laws of nature theodicy. John Polkinghorne runs a version of this. We can flip that one too. We can run a mirror version. So we can say that an evil god will certainly introduce laws of nature. One reason for that is that we cannot engage in the most despicable moral activities unless we know that we do live in a fairly stable law-governed universe. In order for me to do something truly horrendous, I need to know that when I strike a match, it'll produce a flame, and that the flame will ignite the petrol that I poured through the letterbox of the orphanage earlier on, and that will produce a huge ball of flame that will consume all of the children in agony. Unless I live in a stable, law-governed universe, I can't engage in these absolutely horrific, morally depraved actions. You know, I need to know that those connections are going to be in place. So, yeah, the laws of nature are required for the worst kinds of evil, moral evils. The downside to those laws of nature is, oh dear, they produce beautiful sunsets. That's unfortunate from evil God's perspective, but because we enjoy the sunsets, but it's the price he has to pay for the very great evil of me being able to burn your house down with you and your family inside. So we've just flipped the Polkinghorne theodicy. You can flip very many theodicies because, of course, there are loads of them. I've just given you a small sample. I don't think you can flip all of them, though, as I make this clear in the paper. Some can't be flipped, but I don't think that really matters very much so far as my conclusion is concerned. Let's go to the next slide. So earlier on, we looked at skeptical theism, popular with some theists. We looked at the suggestion that just because we can't think of reasons, good reasons for the evils that we observe, doesn't mean that there aren't good God-justifying reasons back there somewhere in the cosmic garage. If that's a good response, then it works just as well in defense of belief in an evil God. Just because I can't think of the uh, evil reasons evil God might have for allowing the observed goods doesn't mean that the evil reasons aren't back there somewhere. They could easily be back there somewhere. Just because I can't think of them doesn't give me a good reason to think that they're not there. It's the exact same logic. If one of these objections, if one of these moves is good, so is the other. And so if skeptical theism works, it works to immunize belief in an evil God against the evidential problem of good, just as effectively as it works to immunize belief in the good God against the evidential problem of evil. So we've flipped some theodicies. We've seen that skeptical theism works just as well. We've seen that many of the most popular arguments for a good God turn out to be just as good arguments for an evil God. So some interesting parallels are emerging here. Let's go to the next slide. So now there are various ways in which I could sort of finish this off, but what I'm going to suggest here is that actually, notwithstanding all of these ingenious mirror theodicies and skeptical theism, I think most people know and recognize that we can rule out an evil God on the basis of observation of the world around us. It is absurd to believe in an evil God, and it is absurd for perhaps amongst other reasons. It is absurd just given what we can see around us in terms of observed goods. There's just way too much good for this plausibly to be the creation of a supremely powerful and malevolent deity. And so if we can reasonably rule out an evil God on the basis of observed goods, the question then becomes, well, why can't we then rule out a good God on the basis of observed evils? Because there appears to be at least a rough symmetry here now between the two God hypotheses. We started off with a good God. We looked at the evidential problem of evil. Looked like quite a problem, but then we came up with some theodicies to try and explain away the evil, and then we came up with skeptical theism to deal with the evils that we couldn't explain. So we thought we drew the conclusion, or Christians often will draw the conclusion, oh, okay, so not a fatal objection then to the evidential problem of evil. Well, if that's true, then seems the same would have to be true of the evil God. But I think it's pretty clear, and at this point, there's a lot of further work we could do. But I'm going to suggest at this point that it is, prima facie, it's pretty clear to most people that we can rule out an evil God on the basis of observation. And if we can do that, then we can rule out a good God on the basis of observation too. There could still be gods back there somewhere. I mean, maybe there's a God who's omnipotent and omniscient, but neither good nor evil. It's just kind of morally neutral, for example. So that God is still on the table. Or maybe two gods, a good one and an evil one. Neither of them can be omnipotent, of course. That's the Manichaean view, of course, or something like the Manichaean view, which St. Augustine signed up to before he became a Christian. It was only when he became a Christian that he suddenly got struck by the fact that there's seemingly an awful lot of evidence against an all-powerful, all-good God. So many gods still on the table. I don't claim to have removed them all, but I think we can quite reasonably rule out on the basis of observation an evil God. And if we can quite reasonably rule out an evil God on the basis of observation, then I think we can quite reasonably rule out a good God too. So I can't remember what's on the next slide. Yeah, I am suggesting it's pretty obvious there's no evil God. Look out the window. And if it's pretty obvious that there's no evil God, then I think it's pretty obvious actually that there's no good God either. I think the real mystery then is why so many people fail to see this, to recognize that. Mackey wrote a book called The Miracle of Theism, famously. He was an atheist, and the reason he thought it was a miracle is he couldn't understand why anyone believed it. It just seemed absurd. And so that's kind of what I'm suggesting here. Right at the beginning, I said people think that belief in God is not unreasonable. Even some atheists would suggest that, actually. I want to suggest that belief in God, in a good God, is really very unreasonable. And actually, the real mystery is why people can't recognize that. And it's in part because they've cooked up a whole load of explanations and they deploy skepticism selectively in order to try and convince themselves that it's not as absurd as it patently is. That's what I'm suggesting here. I can't remember what's on the next slide. Let's find out. Oh, yes. Okay. So, of course, as an atheist, I have to admit that there are things I can't explain. Plenty of things. I don't have a really worked out response to the question, why is there anything at all? I suspect actually there's something wrong with the question, but let's suppose it's a legitimate question. Why is there something rather than nothing? I don't know. But I know that the explanation isn't an evil God. I can reasonably rule that answer out, even whilst not knowing what the actual answer is. And if we can rule out an evil God as an answer, despite not knowing what the answer is, we can reasonably rule out a good God too. The mere fact that there's a puzzle or a mystery doesn't mean that we can't reasonably rule out certain answers to that to that question. So the last slide, I think, is Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, oh no, one before that. Suppose Sherlock Holmes is having a bad day. He doesn't know who done it. He can't figure it out. Still, he can be very confident that the butler didn't do it. Why? Well, because the butler was in the room with Holmes when the crime was committed. So Holmes can be very confident that certain individual didn't do it, even if he doesn't know who did. And similarly, we can be very confident that this isn't the creation of a supremely powerful and malevolent deity, even if we don't know what the explanation for the universe is. But if that's true, then why can't we be equally reasonably confident, know indeed that the universe isn't the creation of a supremely powerful and benevolent deity, even whilst admitting that we don't know why the universe exists? It seems we can rule that hypothesis out too. So I now have this short animation, which may or may not play. It's on the final slide. My guess is not going to play because, yeah, forget that. Okay, so there you go. That's sort of a quick, slightly simplified version of the Evil God challenge. If you've got PowerPoint there, you often have to, yeah, don't worry, just get rid of it. That's fine. Oh yeah, if you hit enable content on the beige bar, can you see enable content? Yeah. Okay, now it'll play. Should do. You may have to go back to the uploading. No sound.
Sorry, excuse me,
Those
Sir Henry.
reality.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Let me play that again.
On one side of the is the natural, observable world. Beyond the veil lies another realm of spirits, angels, demons, and of course, gods. These beings are supposed to inhabit an unobservable supernatural domain that is off limits to science. How do we know these spirits, angels, demons, and gods are there? Some suppose special people, such as psychics and gurus, can glimpse through the veil and tell us about what lies beyond. For example, spiritualists claim they can communicate with those who have passed over to the other side. Others claim to encounter angels and even gods while praying or meditating. But how confident can we be that these mysterious beings are really there? Many atheists argue the world contains too much suffering for it to be the creation of a good God. There are wars, diseases, and natural disasters. Horrific human and animal suffering is built into the very fabric of the world we're forced to inhabit. Isn't this good evidence that even if there is a creator, he is not all-powerful and all-good? Of course, the faithful try to explain the suffering. Some talk about free will. They say God could have made us puppet beings that always behaved well. But if we're God's puppets, we're not responsible for what we do. God cut our strings so that we can freely choose to do good. But then some of us choose to do evil and cause suffering. That's the price God pays for our free will. So have we shown it's reasonable to believe in God after all? I don't think so. Suppose that, after a bump on the head, I come to believe the universe was created not by a good God, but by an evil God. I believe there's a single, all-powerful creator whose malice knows no bounds and whose wickedness is beyond our comprehension. Who believes in a God like that? Almost no one. Why not? Because the world would look much more like a torture chamber if it were created by such a powerful and wicked being. There's too much love and laughter, and too many people being kind and helping each other for this to be the creation of an evil God. Yet notice I can explain why my evil God allows good, in the same way religious folk explain why their good God allows evil. I can say, my evil God could have made us puppet beings that always did bad things. But if we're his puppets, we're not responsible for what we do. That's why evil God cut our strings and set us free, to allow us to freely choose to do evil. Unfortunately for evil God, some of us then choose to do good deeds. That's the price evil God pays to allow moral evil. Have I shown that belief in an evil God isn't absurd? No, of course not. Sure, I can cook up such ingenious explanations to defend both belief in a good God and belief in an evil God. But still, we can be pretty sure there's no evil God, can't we? So why can't we be pretty sure there's no good God either? We may not know why the universe exists, but surely we are justified in supposing it is not the creation of either of these two gods.
Good. Okay. So thank you for that. And so here it is in a nutshell, the evil God challenge then, I suppose. People put the evil God hypothesis very low down on the scale of reasonableness. I mean, it's like believing in fairies or Santa Claus or something like that. And they typically put it very low on the scale of reasonableness because of what they see of the universe. It's got too much good in it. But if belief in an evil God is very low on the scale of reasonableness, why is belief in a good God significantly more reasonable than that? You know, at least halfway up the scale of reasonableness, like, you know, believing in extraterrestrial intelligence or something like that. How likely is that? I don't know, 50-50 maybe, but it's not an unreasonable thing to believe. That's way more reasonable than belief in an evil God. And now the challenge then, the evil God challenge, is just to explain why one of these two beliefs is so much more reasonable than the other one. And I personally, I don't know how to meet it. There are various strategies you could adopt. I'm sure some of them have occurred to you. Basically, what you need to do is find some sort of asymmetry between the two God hypotheses. You know, maybe there's like much better theodicies for one than the other, or maybe there's like a really good argument for a good God and there isn't a really good argument for an evil God, or something like that. That would tip the balance. But I think that's what you need to do. So really, I guess what the evil God challenge is it's kind of a spell breaker. I think that many people who are religious have kind of hypnotized themselves and each other into thinking that must be pretty, not unreasonable. And they've adopted these strategies in order to convince themselves of that. Um, and if you sort of if I, as an atheist, approach them sort of head on, they've got all of these defensive moves laid out in front of them. They've got this theodicy, they've got that theodicy, they've got skeptical theism, and so on. They've got a huge array of moves that they will deploy to defend what they believe. What I'm attempting to do here is kind of sneak around the side by creating a parallel belief system, which they, when they look at it, go, oh no, that one's ridiculous, because it is. And then I'm asking them to explain why the moves that they're making are any more reasonable than the moves that are being made over there. And now they're in potentially a much trickier situation. I think at that point they may suddenly get a sort of a sort of a light bulb may go off, and they may suddenly realise that, oh, perhaps I am being actually quite ludicrous here in maintaining this belief in the teeth of all of this evidence. That's really, I suppose, the main aim of the Evil God Challenge is it's kind of a spell breaker. The aim is to kind of snap somebody out of just assuming that they've dealt with the problem, when in fact I strongly suspect they haven't. Anyway, I'll stop there. So, questions and stuff.
All right, thank you very much. Let's give Stephen a round of applause. So that's a very thought-provoking, intellectually challenging, and of course, for a lot of us, sobering presentation. It certainly made us reconsider perhaps the evil God challenge, that is our notions of good, evil, and the nature of God as well. And I think as Filipino, it kind of speaks to us in a higher level, since we certainly get to ask, why are we made to suffer through these things, particularly disasters, calamities, and even some issues in the government. Um, so uh yeah for a lot of us, I'm sure Stephen's talk resonated a lot, so we're really grateful for your insights and for your clarity in presenting the topic at hand. So for now, we are opening the floor for questions. Now, there are those of you who are raising your hand. Thank you very much. Please wait for us to call you. For those of you who are not able to perhaps raise your hand and speak, you are encouraged to type down your answers via chat or the Q&A toolbox below. So, Professor was writings on the Evil God challenge, so you can perhaps backtrack in our chat box and download it to read more about Professor Law's presentation. Okay, so with that, we will be entertaining for some of the questions written via the Q&A portal. So there are two from Dr. Rojan Ramirez, but perhaps we can entertain one because there are a lot. According to Dr. Rojan Ramirez, kindly comment on the possibility of prevenient grace vis-a-vis the evil God. I think this is the evil God, sir. So, are you familiar with the notion of prevenient grace, Stephen?
Can you just say that again? I'm struggling to hear. Am I familiar
Sorry.
with the notion
Of a prevenient grace. I tried to look it up. It says here that prevenient grace is a phrase used to describe the grace given by God that precedes the act of sinners exercising saving faith in Jesus. So I think this is one of the Christian doctrines, I think. Or
Yeah,
would you
well, I'm not
yes.
very familiar with that. I would like to hear about it. uh yeah, I'm wondering how it would be relevant here. I don't If I could get a quick explanation, that would be great, but otherwise I'm going to struggle because I don't really understand what it is.
I see. Would you be willing to elaborate on your question, Dr. Ramirez? Is he here? Okay.
Yeah, hi.
So
I'm sorry,
okay.
my camera is having some problem. But anyhow, prevenient grace is it's kind of an idea that tells it's an anticipated just before one suffers. There's already this God's grace given to him for the person to overcome such. It
Okay.
is something that, for example, when one is struggling, just before he struggles, there's already a grace given to him so that he can overcome his struggle.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was asking also in relation with the evil genius. I mean, the evil genius isn't equivalent to the evil god. It's something like when you're up to something and you're you're really that good in attaining something, and then suddenly something suddenly pops out and tells you to commit something that something goes awry, or something goes not usual, and you're hindered by it. And by the way, thank you for your talk. I appreciate it much.
Yeah. No, thank you. No, yeah, it sounds to me like that you can kind of mirror that. And in fact, I think you just did it for me, didn't you? You can run a kind of reverse version of the suggestion. So if the suggestion is that when we face terrible trials and tribulations, God steps in to give us the strength to overcome these things. Well, first of all, that's very powerfully empirically challenged, that view, because clearly very many people don't have the strength to overcome these things, and they lose a child and they take their own life. Say, the world is full of examples of horrendous suffering where people do not have God has not been generous enough to provide them with the power to overcome that. So first of all, it's just not very plausible. But secondly, you could run a similar suggestion in defense of belief in an evil God. I think you can anyway. Let me think about it. Um, there are. How would it go? I think were you making that suggestion? Was that the idea that you had? Sorry, put you on the spot.
Dr. Ramirez, are you there?
Well, maybe this. If I mean, there is pain and there is suffering, and evil God puts us through that. And actually, when it looks like we're about to overcome it, he steps in and puts the boot in and makes sure we he hits us with something else at the last minute, or make sure that we do succumb. So you can there's a kind of parallel move that you could also make there. I'm not sure we have any kind of challenge sort of way of dealing with the evil God challenge here, because it's not very plausible that God does do that, and secondly, you can mirror it. I'll stop there.
Dr. Ramirez is now unmuted, but perhaps for further questions, Dr. Ramirez, you can perhaps type it up on chat so we can entertain more questions. Okay, since there are a lot and there are a lot of people who are also raising their hands, so let's try to give chance to others as well. So for the rest of those who will be asking questions, please make sure to keep your questions thoughtful and civil, of course, so that we can maximize this opportunity. Now, I will also like to raise one question which has been raised by quite a number of people. They ask, could you comment on the possibility that God is neither maximally good nor maximally evil? Is it reasonable to believe that he is amoral?
It's more reasonable because you don't then have the evidential problem of good and the evidential problem of evil to deal with. That God hypothesis is a much better empirical fit. It is not challenged by observation of the world around us. That's not to say that it's a reasonable belief, though, because there may be other arguments against there being such a deity And indeed there are, there are all sorts of objections that could still be raised. But it's just that the evidential problem of the good and the evidential problem of evil are no longer objections. So, yeah, that would be my answer to that.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Stephen. Now we will call on one of the attendees raising their hand. So Rosendo Boncaras, can you raise your
Hello,
question?
hello, hello,
Hi.
Hi.
hello. Yeah, good evening or good afternoon. Yeah,
Morning here. Yeah.
yeah. I hope my question will be still within the parameter of your thinking, because in my case, honestly, I'm confused, because my question is like this: uh, what is the necessity by which there is the need to rule out uh, good God on the account of the evil evil problem existing, and on the other hand, to rule out the evil God on the basis of the good things that we can observe in the world? My question is, what is the necessity that we have to ask, or we have to explain this scenario in relation to our way of living as a moral individual?
I don't think that, I mean, all what I'm looking at here is arguments against belief in specific deities, an all-powerful all good God, an all-powerful and all evil God. You may not be interested in God, in which case you won't be particularly interested in these arguments. You may have other interests, including morality. That's fine. There's no necessity that you think about this question any more than there's any necessity that you think about other metaphysical questions. But I think most people actually do have an interest in God, whether they believe or not. Most people have, they're kind of interested in the topic, and so I think these arguments will be of interest to them. But if they don't interest you, well, that's fine. Not we don't all have the same interests.
Okay. All right. So thank you for that question. Now we would like to raise another question from the chat. It says from Mr. Bonnie Marticho, if gratuitous good undermines the evil God hypothesis and gratuitous evil undermines the good God hypothesis, does this suggest that both models might fail due to the reliance on human moral categories? Could a morally transcendent God resolve this tension? So I think it's related to the notion of the amoral God.
Yes, you can. No, that's a very interesting question. Yeah. So, yeah, we're supposing that we know what we mean, at least roughly, when we talk about God being good, a God of love, a perfect being, or whatever. And similarly, when it comes to, God being evil. But you could, I mean, sometimes people defend, this is perhaps more of a Roman Catholic thought, really, actually, a sort of Thomist thought that God's goodness is of a completely different category. It's not like human goodness. When we talk about God's goodness, there's something maybe analogous to what we mean by goodness, but it's not the same thing. And you could say the same about evil God, I suppose, actually. I'm as a defense of belief in a good God, I don't find that kind of response very convincing. It seems to me that it's sort of semantic trick, really. Sort of sleight of hand is going on. So you can say that, oh, God's goodness is of a mysteriously different sort that transcends our ability to understand it. And that's why his goodness is completely compatible with him torturing children to death over 300,000 years. So the fact that they have died appallingly over 300,000 years is not evidence against God's goodness, because good, when applied to God, means something different to what it would mean if applied to a mere human being. That you can make that move, but then if God's goodness ends up being mysterious and ineffable, and beyond our comprehension, then how can we know that his goodness is of a sort that requires that we worship him or be grateful towards him? How can we know that his goodness is of that sort? Well, we can't anymore, because his goodness is of a completely, I mean, if somebody was nice to me, I'd be grateful to them, and that's a good thing. But remember, God's goodness is different. So how do I know that gratitude is an appropriate attitude to have towards God, or worship is an appropriate attitude towards? You can't know these things anymore. And yet typically the people that make this move think that we should be worshipping God and we should be grateful to God and so on. So really, they're picking and choosing. When it suits them to know about God's goodness, they know about it. When God's goodness gets them into trouble with the evidential problem of evil, they make it all mysterious. So it's kind of, now you see it, now you don't. Kind of sleight of hand is going on. So I don't find that kind of move, personally, I don't find that kind of move very, very persuasive. And in fact, the exact same move could also be used in defense of belief in an evil God. You could say God's evilness is not like the evilness of a human being. It's of a categorically different sort. And it's entirely compatible with him giving us cheesecake and beautiful sunsets and love and so on. That's all compatible with evil God's evil, because his evil is it works just as well. So again, we're not doing anything to show that one of these God hypotheses is a bit more reasonable than the other one.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Stephen. Now we call on one of our PhD students, Professor Tony Villasor from the Extension Program in Pampanga.
Yeah. Thank you, my dear Simel, our faculty, tenured faculty, and UPD Diliman. So my question actually is, this is quite a great expose from Professor Stephen Law, quite a doctor in philosophy, because I find it more interesting that he goes beyond the atheist point of views that are very corresponding, like Dawkins, etc., Hicks, etc. And he goes even after the apopathicist idea of theology, or the God of the absentee God, the God of the burning bush, or God that is the negative God, negative presence of God. That's quite a revealing God, of course, because now he is going towards the epistemic questioning of the reality of what is the real knowledge of God. Because how can we know God, which we really do not know, no? I mean, epistemically, in philosophy, we cannot know God per se, no? This is more of a question of a philosopher who is going towards the idea that we just take away the Pascal wagers type of questioning of believing God, yeah, because that's the common for believers. But this is more of a, how do we have the confidence to know a kind of a distance, epistemic distance, of really ascertaining our beliefs or our epistemic knowledge. So this is very logical for me. This kind of training in argumentations in the philosophy of religion is very ontological, very direct to the logic of the person, of how do you understand God. How can you know something which you don't really know? No, so if God is the first cause of everything, this is an argument that is very valid. Then God is also the cause of goodness as well as of evil. To say that in an argument logically, so he took away all this common arguments of the freedom of will, defense, these arguments of the divine command theory of ethics, and he also went away, goes beyond Plantinga's beliefs on the Augustinian, the fall, that God created evil because of man's freedom of choice. So now he is trying to reverse the logic that he's questioning, that how can we really understand that God can also make something go beyond the Pascal wager, and go turn around your beliefs of the so-called natural beliefs of religion. I think that's challenging. For me, this is very challenging because this is more than the atheist and the apopaticist point of view.
Ah, good.
Yeah.
It's a comment. It's not a question. It's a comment.
Yeah, it's more of a comment.
Okay.
Do you believe in the apopaticist point of view? Negative?
Well, I'm very if you I worry that it's a game of semantic sleight of hand for the reasons I just described, actually, that the apophatic tradition is interesting, and you can try and defend belief in God by whenever somebody takes aim, you remove the target and say, oh, no, you've misunderstood. You don't really understand what we mean by God. It's something much more mysterious and sophisticated than your crude understanding. But then the minute that the threat has receded, the atheist has left the room. Oh, now God comes back, and now we're all praising him and being grateful to him. And but how can you know that these are appropriate attitudes to have? How can you know that God's goodness is of the sort that would require that we be grateful to him for the things that he does? We can't know that anymore. So it's a kind of it's cheating. It's kind of putting up the target, and then as soon as somebody takes aim, you take it away, and then when the threat goes away, you bring it back again. And it's inconsistent. Is my feeling about the apophatic tradition.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Sir Tony. Now we call on Carl. I think your hand has been raised for a while. We have plenty of questions, by the way, and a lot of debates are happening over chat as well. So we will try to get a copy of your questions and perhaps send them over to Stephen for him to answer. If that's okay with you, Stephen.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, Carl, can you? Oh wait. Okay. So can you share your
Hi.
question, please?
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, Dr. Law. I like that you mentioned that one strategy is to come up with a symmetry breaker, because it seems to me that, well, at least personally, there is some sort of a asymmetry between theism and monotheism. So, in the paper, you utilize a conception of God called perfect being theism. Perfect being theists say that. So what perfect being theists say about God is He is maximally great being. For those who doesn't know, so that is roughly God possesses attributes that make a being great to their maximal level. So the comparison is actually between a maximally good God and a maximally evil God. Correct me if I'm wrong. My central problem is these concepts are, it seems to me, they are asymmetrical in terms of their conceptual coherence. So let me expound briefly. Evil is, for me, is not a great-making property. A maximally evil God possesses all properties that are great-making except one, namely maximally evil, or maximal evil. So a maximally good God is actually, to my mind, it's simpler and more coherent than a maximally evil God. And my second reason is, I think we can doubt that a malevolent God would create anything based on a maximally evil being's psychology, based on its psychology, right? Because if we are going to try to imagine, I would imagine a maximally evil God having, maximally contemptuous. He is maximally contemptuous, maximally self-hating, maximally selfish, etc. Moreover, we could also look into the concept of evil, right? Traditional Christian theism generally defines evil as a privation of good, and as such, it doesn't have an actual ontological status. So in this light, it seems like a malevolent God is internally incoherent and thus highly implausible. So it seems that, at least it seems to me, that the symmetry thesis fails, and if so, the evil God challenge fails.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
So yeah.
yep.
If you read the paper, both of these objections are covered in the paper, but I didn't cover them in the talk because it would have been too involved. You could argue that the concept of an evil God is more complex than the idea than the concept of a good God, and that might be true. Perhaps it is true. But it doesn't really make very much difference to the Evil God Challenge, because the way I set it up today, the Evil God Challenge is this: to explain why, if we can reasonably rule out an evil God on the basis of observed goods, why can we not similarly rule out a good God on the basis of observed evils? Pointing out that one of these hypotheses is simpler than the other one doesn't really change anything very much. If I believe that everyone that lives in Swindon has a fairy living on their head, that's an absurd belief, empirically challenged. But it's simpler than the hypothesis that everyone living in Swindon has a fairy living on their head, and that fairy then has 1,000 elves surrounding its head in turn. That's a far more complicated concept. But it doesn't matter, because both of these, despite the fact that one's a bit simpler than the other, both are clearly adequately ruled out on the basis of observation. So similarly, pointing out that belief in a good God is a bit simpler than belief in an evil God doesn't really change anything very much. It's almost beside the point. The point about the privation view of evil is a view of evil that you find particularly in Roman Catholic circles, but not even all Roman Catholics sign up to it. It's not really taken seriously at all outside. Almost not taken seriously at all outside of theological settings. The idea that evil is a privation is the idea that it's an absence of something that ought to be there. So blindness is the classic illustration. Why is blindness an evil? Because if somebody, a human being like me, ought to be sighted, and if they're not, then there's something missing that they ought to have. Whereas when it comes to a brick, say, or a mole, the blindness is not an evil because it's not supposed to have that particular property. So that's a way of thinking about evils on which there are absences or privations. The problem with that view really is twofold. First of all, extreme agony doesn't appear to be a mere absence of something. It seems to be something positive in its own right. And so, real extreme pain is widely considered to be a straightforward counterexample to the privation view of evil, because it's more than just an absence of well-being. It's a lot more than that. So it's not a particularly plausible view. Secondly, it relies on which properties which examples you choose. So if you choose blindness, it looks like evil is a privation of good, whereas other times when we explain what something is, it seems more natural to get things around the other way. So, peace is an absence of war. It's that good is an absence of a certain evil, for example. So it seems as if it kind of depends. People that like the privation view of evil tend to cherry pick the illustrations that they use. It's not a terribly plausible view. But let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that the privation view of evil is correct. It almost certainly isn't, but let's suppose it is. How does that help with the evil God challenge? It doesn't really, because what you would be showing, as you correctly pointed out, is that there's some logical incoherence in the idea of an evil God, which arguably is not mirrored when it comes to the idea of a good God. But actually, there are plenty of people think that there are logical incoherences in the idea of a good God too. But again, for the sake of argument, let's suppose that there aren't, and that there is a problem when it comes to the idea of an evil God. There is some logical incoherence. Does that mean that the evil God challenge doesn't work? No, because the way I set it up was, if there is more than enough evidence, empirical evidence, to rule out an evil God, notwithstanding the fact that there may also be conceptual or logical problems as well, which you can feel free to point those out, I don't mind. But if we would consider belief in an evil God ludicrous anyway, just on the basis of observation, then we should consider belief in a good God ludicrous on the exact same basis. The fact that there happens to be some further problem with an evil God that doesn't affect a good God is more or less neither here nor there, because both beliefs end up very low on the scale of reasonableness. I explain this in the paper. If you're interested, you could read the paper. I'll stop there.
All right, thank you so much for that question, Carl. Now we have another question in chat. This question has something to do with the repercussions of believing in the morally evil God in relation with some of the other religions whose moral systems revolve around the notion that God is good. What are your thoughts regarding this, and what will be the further possible ramifications of such?
Yes, well, if you believed in an evil God, you'd probably be quite depressed. It's not a nice belief to hold. It's a very depressing belief. Possibly that's one of the reasons why no one finds it a terribly attractive thing to believe. Beyond the fact that it's just not very plausible. So yeah, the ramifications would be different for the two beliefs. But I'm not really interested here in the consequences of holding these beliefs. I just want to know which is the more reasonable belief and why. And I can't see it currently reason to think that belief in a good God is significantly more reasonable than belief in an evil God, given that belief in an evil God is pretty ludicrous, just given observation of the world around us. I'll stop there.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Maybe we can accommodate perhaps three more questions, but if you try to look at the chat, Stephen, there are a lot of discussions going
Yeah.
on, so I'm sure a lot of them would really like for you to answer their question and perhaps chip in as well on the discussions. But for now, let's try to entertain one attendee who's raising their hand. Rex Belly Alejandro, can you perhaps raise your question to Stephen?
Hello, good afternoon here, Dr. Law.
Mhm.
First, I find your paper very interesting. I would like to spend more time reading it and think if I can offer a counter example to the symmetry thesis. But
Okay.
I would like to raise something else, and I want to know if what you say about this. So I read something about somewhere, so it's not a novel idea anyway, that the problem of evil seems to be dissolved once we consider that God, a good God, is not anthropocentric. Like when human beings are not considered as the valuable part of creation. And if, for example, a good God could still be benevolent without being anthropocentric, and it dissolves the problem of evil, it's no longer controversial. Does it also symmetrically translate to making the evil God challenge also no longer controversial?
I'm having trouble hearing you. Are you saying that did you use the word anthropocentric?
Yeah, most of the time, the problem of evil is controversial because we consider, we cannot understand why something evil happens to mostly humans. It's more centered on favoring humans. So we cannot understand why God would allow suffering to mostly humans, even if not. So once we understand that, for example, accept that a benevolent God could have no preferences, like it is okay to harm humans through storms and typhoons because it's part of the natural order, which is good, then the problem of evil would be dissolved in a way. Like um, the
Yeah.
presence of evil is no longer controversial in the presence of a good God. If you can consider that a benevolent God would still be benevolent without preferential option for a certain species, for example.
Well, he may not have a preference for any particular species, but he's still unleashing unimaginable suffering on all of them. So, even if, why would he do that? We would need there needs to be some good reason for that. And I can't imagine what it could possibly be. So I take the point that maybe a benevolent God wouldn't necessarily favor humans over any other um, uh, kind of creature. Maybe. I mean, that's not the traditional Christian view, of course, but maybe that's right. Maybe all sentient life should be treated equally. Um, that doesn't really solve the problem of evil, though, because there's evil affecting all of the species equally. So I'm not sure. Maybe I've misunderstood your point, but I'm not sure why there's any response there to the problem of evil yet. But I may have. My apologies if I didn't understand.
Um, Rex, would you like to elaborate, or perhaps you can elaborate on your question in our form so that we can, or you can perhaps formulate your question better so that Professor Law can also give an ample and adequate answer to it. Let's try to accommodate several more questions, if you may, Stephen. Also, there are still a lot of questions via chat and from people raising their hands. So perhaps we can accommodate John Leonard Polon since he's been raising his hands for a while.
Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Hello, am I audible? Hello po, I'm John Poland from USD. So
Mhm.
I would like to ask with regards to the apologetics point of view. So in Christian apologetics, there are three: one classical, one presuppositional, and one evidential. So in the presuppositional's point of, they would tend to argue, but they would argue, uh, and about the attributes of God, uh, in from the word of from the Bible itself. So, in lieu of this, how do we respond to the arguments of a presuppositionalist argument on the attributes of God, such as benevolence?
Um, well, I may not be understanding what you mean here, but I thought the presuppositionalist kind of doesn't argue for, but simply starts with a certain position, maybe about God's attributes, say. And we don't need any kind of underpinning argument for taking the position that we do about God's attributes. We can just start with that. That can just be our presupposition. And maybe that's okay. But then you run into the problem that your presuppositions may be evidentially challenged. I mean, I might presuppose that there are fairies living at the bottom of my garden, but when I go down there, turns out it's not true. What I presupposed isn't true. And the evidential problem of evil, similarly, challenges the presuppositions that people may have about God and his existence and his attributes. So I can't see that the presuppositionalist has any response to the evidential problem of evil simply by virtue of their being presuppositionalists. They still face the problem. They've got to deal with it, I think. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you so much. Um, there are other questions from our Q&A portal. Let me read it down. It's a little long, but the
Okay.
argument in a nutshell states that instead of arguing for a morally transcendent or morally neutral or a moral God, could we perhaps conceive a non-moralistic theodicy that overcomes the challenges of both good God and evil God? So, for instance, the commenter mentioned that maybe we can consider a maximally metaphysical God, which prefers more moral good because more life can exist as opposed to more unnecessary deaths. So it's not necessarily in an ethical perspective, but according to the commenter, is more on the metaphysical perspective.
I'm not sure I understand that. Um, mm,
To
I mean,
elaborate, it has some. Oh yes.
obviously, if you believe in a God that's neither all good nor all evil, then there is no evidential problem of good or evil. Um, so you can sidestep the problem in that way. We've only removed two gods from the table. There are loads of gods still on the table, um, as I pointed out. I'm not quite sure what the suggestion that's being made there. I have to admit.
To elaborate, the commenter mentioned that, on the contrary, or rather, to further um, elaborate on their view, an aesthetically good God might exist because there are more stories of moral goods overcoming moral evils, and this engender more beautiful things, as well
Oh,
as a metaphysically good God would prefer moral good because more life can exist. So it's not necessarily an ethically good or ethically evil God. It belongs to something else, aesthetics perhaps, or metaphysics.
aesthetics, yes. So he just likes beauty, not moral
Yes,
particularly.
not goodness. Yes.
Yeah, maybe that one's still on the table. I'm not sure. I'd have to think through exactly what the ramifications of an aesthetically perfect being that values aesthetics rather than moral attributes per se. Not sure about that one. Possibly there's no problem so far as the problem of evil or the problem of good is concerned. I would say one thing about here's a thought that I'm just going to chuck in as a sort of extra thought. You could try and respond to the problem of evil by suggesting that there's evidence for a good God not mirrored by evidence for an evil God, and the evidence is miracles, and religious experience and religious tradition and scripture. So we have many reports of miracles being performed by God or via God's power. Many of these are authenticated by the Catholic Church. We have many people who have experienced a good God. People don't experience an evil God. That's evidence for a good God. And then we have scripture and tradition, which is there telling us about a good God. There's nothing like that supporting belief in an evil God. So this changes the balance very significantly. That you could argue that. But actually, I'm not sure that the distribution of miracles and religious experience and religious traditions does support belief in a good God more than an evil God. Possibly it supports belief in an evil God more than a good God. So here's why. If I was a good God, well, if I was an evil God, actually, this is what I would do. I would appear, I wouldn't want you to know I was evil because I'm a deceiver and I can actually maximize evil by duping people. So what I can do is appear good, appear to people in religious experiences, perform actual miracles, which I can do. I can raise Jesus from the dead. I can create Jesus and raise him from the dead. I'll do that as an evil God. And then I'll tell these people some stuff and start a tradition. There will be scripture and so on. And then I'll go to some people over here and I'll do the same thing. I'll appear to be good. I will appear in their religious experiences. I will perform the miracles, which will be bona fide miracles because I am, God. I can do it. And I'll tell them some stuff that contradicts what I told those people over there. And then I'll just step back and watch what happens next, which is entirely predictable, which is that the two camps will attack each other with a ferocity that simply wouldn't be possible if they didn't know for sure that they have the one true God on their side. And they can know that because they've got the miracles and they've got the religious experience. So that would be if you were an evil God, you'd probably do that. If you were a good God, you would not do that because it's completely obvious what's going to happen. You would not appear and or allow people to end up with these completely different perspectives, nevertheless thinking that they've got the one true God on their side and that he's performed the miracles and so on. So arguably the distribution of miracles, religious experiences and scripture and tradition across the face of the earth is a much better empirical fit for an evil God than a good God. So it may be that in some respects belief in an evil God is more reasonable than belief in a good God. Of course, they're both ridiculous beliefs, but at least the belief in an evil God doesn't have this particular problem that you just wouldn't expect religious experiences and miracles and scripture and tradition to be distributed in the way that they are if this was the problem, if this was the creation of a good God, whereas it probably is what you would expect if this was the creation of an evil God.
I see. All right. Thank you very much for that thoughtful answer. Then now it's already 6:02 and we've kind of exceeded our time limit, but I see that there's still a lot more questions, so I encourage those who would like to ask further questions to use the form or evaluation and certificate request form to air out any comments you might have regarding our lecture and any questions you might have for Professor Stephen Law. We would be more than happy to send those questions to him, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so thank you so much. Again, let's give a round of applause for this very fruitful discussion. I hope that we all had something, we can all take something that new and try to sit with our thoughts now and perhaps consider the possibility of mulling over the existence of an evil God. So at this point, I would like to present our virtual e-certificate to Stephen for being our speaker. So let me read it first. So this is the certificate of appreciation from the UPD Department of Philosophy uh, to Stephen Law D. Phil Oxford for lecturing on the Evil God Challenge for the UPD-Oxford's lecture series taking place via Zoom on this day, November 18, 2024, signed by our chairperson, Professor Maria Liza Ruth Ocampo, and signed by Assistant Professor Enrique Benjamin R. Fernando, Project Coordinator and Project Head. So again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us in this day, and we hope that it has been as significant and fruitful to you as it is for us. So before you all go, you can perhaps take a picture of this slide. You can scan the QR code for the evaluation form and certificate request later. And also, we would like to plug as well. Um, last installment for our lecture series will occur on Saturday, November 23. We hope to see you uh at the lecture of Dr. Doug Bamford on roles and Nozick on justice and taxation. So I'm sure the discussion would be equally as interesting as this one. But to note, this has been our most attended lecture series so far. At its peak, we have gotten 510 attendees. So again, thank you very much for taking part and becoming a part as well of this historical event. So we hope to see you same time on Saturday. And thank you again, Stephen, for gracing us and giving us the opportunity to listen to your discussion. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Will
you.
it be okay if we take a screenshot perhaps of those of you for those of you who can open your cameras?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just take a free group chat, perhaps a group photo. Okay. So Professor Henry, Sir Henry, can you take a screenshot?
Okay. There are 7 slides on my screen, so just give me a few minutes, okay? 1, 2, 3. For the second slide, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So many people have opened their cameras. Thank you so much for participating. Third, 1, 2, 3. Fourth, 1, 2, 3. The fifth picture, 1, 2, 3. Sixth picture, 1, 2, 3. And last but not least, our seventh set in 1, 2, 3. Okay, Simon, I think we're good.
All right. So again, thank you very much, and we hope to see you on Saturday as well. Thank you very much again, Stephen,
Thank you,
for joining us
Stephen.
today.
My pleasure.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Simon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Ma'am Ingrid, are you still there? Perhaps it's okay if we end the meeting now.
No, not yet. I'm taking photos of the um chat.
Questions. All right. Sorry. But perhaps we can get a copy of the chat as well when we access the recordings. I'm not sure if that's possible, but before we can do that.
I've taken some screenshots of the chat then. I can send you, Sir Henry.
Thank you so much, Sir Gavin. Thank you again, everyone. There's still a lot of open questions as well in Q&A. I'm not sure though. Can you include that, Sir Gavin, in your screenshots?
Yes, yung 12. Na-include
Yung
ko na.
12. Pero
Yes.
dito parang nasagot yung 10. There are 10 questions and there are 2 questions answered. Kasi marami pang naka-raise ng hand eh.
Oh, I'm not sure which one.
I'm
Although,
okay.
na-screenshot ko lang lahat. Okay.
Sige.
Sir Henry, I think na-picturean din ata ni Sir Henry.
Okay, good. That's good. Thank you, everyone. Yan.